Hello, and welcome back to the Wallfacer podcast. Today's guest is Matt Fiebach, co-founder of Entropy Advisors, full-time contributors within the Arbitrum DAO. And previously, Matt was a research analyst at Blockworks Research. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thanks for hopping on right before Thanksgiving. So, I guess a great place to start is, for those who don't know, can you tell us what Entropy Advisors is and what you guys do?
Yeah, so Entropy Advisors is a company working exclusively with Arbitrum DAO to help accelerate DAO development. So what do I actually mean by accelerate DAO development? Basically, our goal is to help Arbitrum DAO reach a mature state where it has efficient and effective operations quicker than most DAOs do. So if you look across, different decentralized governance systems, there's only a few that have been around for more than a couple years. And those few seemed to have found some way to facilitate, effective operations and effective, treating the DAO more like a business. Obviously, DAOs aren't businesses exactly, but able to operate efficiently. So we think that we have some ways of providing services that help Arbitrum move towards that state more quickly. So when it really comes down to it, the two things that we do at a really high level would be proposals as a service. So we drive proposals that don't benefit us in any way. So we've already been resourced by the DAO. Like, we started by getting a little grant from the Arbitrum Foundation, and then the DAO actually hired us for another year of exclusive work. So we drive proposals that only benefit Arbitrum and the Arbitrum ecosystem. Generally speaking, there's a lot of legwork involved in passing a proposal. So there's no reason that someone would go do it unless it benefited them in some way. When we drive proposals, we don't have that issue. The second would be basically helping with third parties to get involved in the DAO. We help with like a little bit of hand holding, giving them some of the needed context, giving them some introductions to decrease the friction of talented and sophisticated contributors coming and getting involved in the DAO. So examples of that might be like an events provider, a marketing provider, an LST, or different protocols who, want something from the DAO, and we're there as a kind of a support mechanism.
I see. So you guys have been doing some capacity of this for a while before you got involved full-time. What was it about Arbitrum specifically that made you and your co-founders want to bet your entire company on Arbitrum specifically? What was happening there that got you so excited?
Yeah, so Arbitrum is one of the few examples of a DAO where the protocol team or the labs team who created it gave full control over everything to the DAO. So control over upgradability of the, different contracts involved in Arbitrum's ecosystem. There's a decentralized security council, which the DAO actually votes on and gets to choose who that is. At the end of the day, the DAO is actually the superior organization that has full control of the protocol. When you look at other ecosystems, like, not to call anyone out specifically, but like, for instance, like Uniswap, that's a good example of a DAO, but the smart contracts associated with Uniswap are immutable, meaning there's nothing you can do with them. So all they really control is this treasury and then this fee switch parameter. When you look at Arbitrum, everything from the bridge to the proving mechanism to the sequencer control address and where sequencer revenue flows to, or rather chain profit, it's all controlled by the token holders and by the DAO as a whole. That makes it a really interesting ecosystem because there's so many different problems that you have to solve from the DAO itself. Also, Offchain Labs, the creators of Arbitrum, as well as the Arbitrum Foundation, have largely decided to take a step back from the DAO's day-to-day operations. So they're both there as service providers that, support the DAO when it needs them, but they don't actually take like a strong stance or an opinionated stance within how the DAO should be moving forward and how Arbitrum should, continue to evolve. This is really, really unique. Like, most governance works very, very differently. So it creates an environment where, contributors and delegates are really actually empowered to make impactful change.
Yeah, when I went back and read your initial proposal, with Entropy getting funded by Arbitrum, it was clear that the ambition of trying to pick up this entire operational workload of one of the biggest DAOs was kind of this massive undertaking. If I think about all of the different players in Arbitrum today, yes, you have Offchain and the foundation, as you mentioned. You have other kind of committees, maybe like the Security Council that you mentioned. What are the operational pieces that were falling through the cracks in the biggest sense? Is it communication between these different groups? Were people stepping on each other's toes? Or what was the connectivity that needed to be fixed through some of this operational work?
Yeah, so there was a lot of different things, and a lot of it we're still working on as well. For one example, no one was actually going and creating proposals in the DAO that were to the DAO's best interest or with only the DAO's best interest in mind. So a lot of people were creating great proposals, but there was always some ulterior motive, and that left a lot of work to be done that, there was no incentive for someone to go do, or there was a little incentive for someone to go do, which made it really difficult to get some of the highest priority items done, when what was actually happening was maybe lower priority items that were beneficial to different contributors were moving up on the, to-do list, and there's all this stuff that no one else wants to do that, we have to go do. Additionally, there was no communication mesh layer. So like there was very fragmented conversations between like the foundation and some of the delegates and some of the service providers to the DAO, as well as Offchain Labs. So we try to act as a bit of a communication mesh layer that talks to all of these parties at a regular cadence, and that allows us to have pretty high context on what's going on across different initiatives, which allows everyone to just work together with a little bit less friction. So there's definitely still, it is a truly decentralized organization. So there will actually always be friction. Like, for instance, one interesting example is that the DAO seems a little bit more focused on scaling all these different L1s. So obviously Arbitrum 1 settles to Ethereum. It's a solution that scales Ethereum. But the DAO kind of likes the idea of also scaling other L1s, while Offchain Labs is, priority, it seems, is very focused on Ethereum and maintaining Ethereum security at the L2 level. So there's definitely still pieces where there's just like, different opinions on what the priority should be and how Arbitrum should move forward. But that's kind of the beauty of the DAO. So while we're a mesh layer, it's not like we're, taking some large and in charge stance where our opinion is what goes. Like, that's not at all how it works in Arbitrum DAO. But we definitely do have our own opinion, and we kind of help drive some of these conversations forward.
Yeah, that was something I saw just reading through the forums and prep for this, that it seemed like a lot of things, as someone said, or maybe you said, were being supply side driven. So suppliers that did this service came in, wanted to sell this to Arbitrum essentially, rather than demand side. The thing that felt unclear to me was who drives the demand side in a DAO as sprawling as Arbitrum? Like, where does that bottoms up or top down priority setting come from?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a very interesting question, and we're seeing it change slightly over time. To start, it was very bottoms up, where it didn't really matter who was coming to the DAO and starting a topic of conversation. It was just becoming a priority. If it was a topic that had started, everyone was contributing time to it. Now, I think with a little bit of our help, we're seeing like more formalized conversations between the large delegates, as well as mid-sized delegates and everybody else. Like, it's not like this is some walled garden or anything like that, but you basically see more actual prioritization and conversations about where the DAO should be focusing its efforts and resources happening between, the largest voting power delegates. At the end of the day, there is definitely still room for any contributor to come into Arbitrum DAO and actually have a really impactful voice about how it should look. But I do think it's important that, it's just the truth of the matter that not everyone's voice is equal. Like, I think that that's kind of a misguided thing that people believe about DAOs. Everyone's voice is equal. At the end of the day, it really is the people who have had all these tokens delegated to them that should have the most impactful voices. So one thing that we're working on right now is we've designed this mission, vision, and purpose paper for Arbitrum DAO. So, we've talked to all the stakeholders. We tried to get them as aligned as possible. Like I said, there'll always be some contention, but as aligned as possible to come up with like, what is the purpose of Arbitrum DAO? What's the guiding mission, and what are we actually working towards? After we've ratified this through the DAO, so after the DAO's actually voted on it, we'll have an open process where anyone can come into the DAO and give their matrices of 1 to 2 year strategic objectives for the DAO, which the DAO will then vote on. So some of the work we do is like around this operational, kind of making sure that the DAO has its priorities straight and working towards, a framework for like where everything can fit into a grander framework, moving the DAO towards its end vision.
Yeah, some sort of future planning there, essentially, in terms of Arbitrum is fairly grown up in the grand scheme, but what's Arbitrum want to be when it fully grows up? Mm-hmm. On that, you mentioned in the beginning that there were some other DAOs you looked to that were more mature or older, at least, kind of in terms of the processes they've built. Who stands out to you, I guess? I mean, Maker or...
I think Maker, Lido, Aave, and ENS come to mind for sure as DAOs that have like gone through a lot of the exercises that Arbitrum's going through now. And they've all kind of went a different direction, which is super interesting. So when you look at like MakerDAO, it started very, very decentralized. And then, now it's moving kind of towards a more centralized state where, the original founder has quite a bit of influence over the DAO. And then, over time, they want to go back to that more decentralized state, but with better infrastructure to actually support it. I think everyone has taken some influence from MakerDAO. So when we look at DAOs, everyone's kind of going towards this model of committee driven. So in MakerDAO, they call them core units. In DYDX, they call them sub DAOs. In Lido, they call them work streams. Some places they call them councils, whatever you call them. It's the idea that you empower like a small group of service providers or contributors with the authority and autonomy to go in and have some, work stream that they're working on. Not that the DAO doesn't maintain control, that the DAO should be able to fire them, the DAO should be able to replace them, whatever. But you give some authority so that not every granular, minute decision is moving to actually being voted on. I think Lido is a good example of one who has built on this MakerDAO model quite successfully. It is very different when it comes to a DAO for an application than for an ecosystem like Arbitrum. And Arbitrum's almost like So Arbitrum obviously has the Arbitrum 1 ecosystem, which is like a, general purpose execution environment, L2, where anyone can go build an app. It also has the Orbit product, so anyone can go launch their own chain or their own L2 using the Arbitrum stack. So it's just like quite a diverse range of things that we need to be working on and stuff we need to be supporting compared to an app where I think it's a little bit more clear. But that said, I think Lido's done a good job. Aave has also managed to have very efficient operations. I think that, there's some things about Aave DAO that I would like to see Arbitrum do differently, but overall, a lot of the negatives generally associated with DAOs have been mitigated in Aave, so you got to give them credit.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the different approach, and this is something we can use to talk about your big proposal around this OpCo for Arbitrum as well, is that if I think about someone like Aave, what feels different about maybe a place like Maker is that not everyone who's a core contributor to Maker today comes from the founding team. If I think about Aave, there's maybe a bit more of that. Like if I think about the 3 or 4 core organizations, it's obviously Aave companies, it's probably ACI, it's BGD, and then the auditors and maybe like some of the financial contributors. A lot of those people are like ex-original Aave people. So they have that high context of coming into the organization, some of those other elements as well. And it's like 5 companies that really kind of make up the DAO, all contributing in their own ways.
Yeah. One interesting thing about that too is like Aave companies, I guess, or really Stani and his related organizations seem to have moved away from the Aave protocol to in a lot of regards. Like not that they're gone or not supporting it, but they have a lot of other products that they're working on and ideas that they want to pursue, whether it be Lens or anything else that Aave's been working on, which is quite a lot. So because of that, they actually it's a bit different than anywhere else where like Aave Chan spun up, which is definitely a DAO led organization. It's not part of that, but it is led by an initial team member. So it's kind of like both sides where, the DAO is in full control for sure. There's no question there. The original creators don't even have so much influence, but at the same time, like, I do see what you mean where, a lot of the members of the Aave Chan initiative did come from, the original Aave protocol team.
Right. And I mean, let me just say, I love Aave. It's probably my biggest DeFi position, but I agree with you that Aave Companies is doing several things at this point. At the same time, they did also just get this massive grant funding proposal from Aave the DAO in the past few months or so to lay out this like Aave 2030 vision. And I guess there's a number of DAOs I've looked at where there definitely is this idea of like founder privilege, where if you're the founder of the company, even if you're not, even if you now have a new company that contributes to the DAO, you kind of have special abilities in what you can ask for, essentially. And Maker is an interesting example where Rune definitely tried to step away. And, I think maybe felt or realized that he kind of had to come back to really shepherd things along and make them work. In a case like Arbitrum, where Offchain Labs is obviously still contributing to the protocol, but in their own way, how do you think about their influence and I guess like kind of shepherding the DAO in some way, maybe without like the founders there?
So they actually really don't, and it's both positive and negative. Like the positive is that the DAO is truly empowered to make decisions surrounding the protocol. For example, if Offchain Labs makes a proposal to change out the fraud proof mechanism to a decentralized fraud proofs with Bold, the DAO can just say no. And the truth is, like, if we see a proposal come from Offchain Labs, it definitely does get a bit more, value or merit. But so far, and I think into the foreseeable future, all of their proposals have only been tech focused. Like they've only been upgrades, nothing related to like spending or anything like that. And then additionally, like we even see pushback against their proposals. So right now, I think the foundation, Arbitrum Foundation, working with OCL, is working on proposing Time Boost, which is an MEV solution. And there's actually been like a really interesting, heated conversation in the forums where, it looks like the foundation and OCL are making changes to the Time Boost protocol and the way it's going to be proposed because of comments from the DAO and the thought that the DAO wasn't going to pass it unless they made these changes. Additionally, it all started with the first proposal ever in Arbitrum, AIP1, where basically the DAO turned it down and said, Arbitrum Foundation, OCL, no, like we're not doing this. That proposal was to fund the Arbitrum Foundation, and it actually got rejected. And it was a huge controversy. It ended up,
I remember that well, actually.
Yeah. So it ended up, I was very involved even at the time. So it's funny thinking back on it, but it basically set a precedent. Like the DAO is in charge, like, sorry, Offchain Labs, sorry, Foundation. But obviously they actually gave the DAO that capability. So I guess also thank you, Offchain Labs. Thank you, Arbitrum Foundation.
Yes. Okay, interesting. All right, let's jump around a bit. So when I was prepping for this, the big post that you guys had just put up, I guess 3 or 4 weeks ago, was around this idea of the OpCo or operational company to support Arbitrum, the DAO. I guess what is broken or not broken, but what does the OpCo fix, or what does it supplement within Arbitrum that's missing today?
Yeah, so first, I guess a little breakdown of what OpCo actually is. So this is a proposal currently live in the forum, not currently passed, but on the way to going up to vote by the end of the year. So the idea of OpCo is to set up a new Cayman entity, or it doesn't need to be Cayman, but that's what's being explored. The Arbitrum Foundation is dealing with all legal setup. That's kind of off our plate. But at the end of the day, it's an actual legal entity that is able to hire full-time contributors that are working on what the DAO tells them to. So basically, like one example, let's say the DAO really wants to do an incentives program, but they'd have no idea how they want to run it. They can say, OpCo, here's 10 million ARB. You all are just in charge of leading this incentives initiative. Alternatively, let's say that the DAO said, we know we want to do incentives for DeFi protocols, and we have an idea of what we want. They can still resource OpCo to actually go onboard service providers to go deal with it. So instead of having to do all the service provider onboarding, like maybe we want to work with Gauntlet or Chaos or someone like that, happening in the forums, having like a little bit of a political contest attached to it, it all happens through this central entity. So this creates a lot of benefits for Arbitrum DAO as far as efficient operations, attracting sophisticated actors that might not want to actually go be in the DAO forums, but without actually losing the DAO's power. So in other ecosystems, you see these benefits, like in Optimism or some of these more centralized ecosystems where the foundations have quite a lot of control. There's definitely benefits that come with that. So we're trying to create those benefits without losing this thing that makes Arbitrum special, which is the truly decentralized, truly DAO-led nature of the protocol and ecosystem. So the DAO always will remain superior to this OpCo. It basically has to tell them what to do at all times for it to be able to do anything new. They can ask DAO, can we go do this? And the DAO can say yes. But basically, it creates a lot of the efficiency gains of centralization without losing the most important aspect, which is that the actual everything about the protocol and everything about the DAO is still run by the DAO, and they have accountability and oversight and everything else.
So what's been the reception to that so far? I read through the comments, and I guess if I could kind of sum up what I saw, it's that there is a group of people that obviously recognize the benefits of speed and centralization and just being able to do things more efficiently, hire, high caliber people and let them do their thing. I guess on the flip side, it is also this kind of centralizing element, and maybe people view that some of the transparency they otherwise would have felt is now sort of abstracted away to this management layer. What have you felt so far? And I guess it should be moving to a vote soon as well.
Yeah, so feedback has been largely positive, but has had quite a lot of pushback as well. I guess it's been a very controversial one. I think a lot of people realize that there's a need for this entity for a few different reasons. Like one, negotiations with service providers. Two, ensuring the longevity of DAO programs. Like for instance, let's say, and we would never do this, but let's say like tomorrow Entropy advisors went and quit Arbitrum DAO. All of a sudden, everything we've been working on is just dead in its tracks. So, and this goes for every single DAO initiative. We have delegate incentives, we have protocol incentives, we have grants programs, et cetera, et cetera. So like if the service provider in charge of that initiative left, the DAO's kind of shit out of luck. Like there's just nothing they can do. So by having OpCo, we can ensure the longevity of DAO programs and basically have an entity there to quickly onboard or quickly resource a new actor to go fulfill that role or to fulfill it themselves. So a lot of people see the value, and a lot of the pushback has been, this is changing the paradigm. It's making Arbitrum DAO a bit more centralized in some ways. Like as far as the actual authority, it'll always be in the DAO, but a lot of the operational work, a lot of the things that the DAO does will now have the ability to go through a centralized entity if the DAO wants that. So yeah, some people are definitely more decentralization maxis and want like completely bottoms up structures across every aspect of the DAO. I think that at Entropy Advisors, we like fundamentally disagree with that notion. I think that the end authority has to be decentralized. You need to have that special case of empowering your DAO to have power, to empowering your DAO to control like aspects of the protocol and all aspects of the treasury, but that you should, resource some of these more centralized groups or actors to have autonomy to do their work without granular oversight, without dealing with politics, without dealing with drama. So yeah, I guess like there will always be that fundamental difference in mindsets. Like some people, support there's different ideas about how DAO should move forward. But I think from our perspective, we're strong believers in that idea to to give some autonomy, to give some agency to actors to go and get shit done without dealing with the politics.
Well, what would you view as the most analogous structure out there today? I know from a legal perspective, this is very different, but maybe something like the Uniswap Foundation feels kind of similar.
I guess. I mean, so the Uniswap Foundation's a bit different than most foundations in that it's like, I think it's a 501c3 in the United States, like a charity
Yeah.
in the United States, which is a bit weird in itself. And then two, mainly their scope is around giving out grants. So I guess it would probably be the most similar in that it was an entity that spun up out of a DAO to facilitate work on behalf of the DAO. But I think a lot of the structures that we've created, both as far as what we're exploring on the legal side with the Arbitrum Foundation and what we're exploring on the actual operational side and the checks and balances in place, and the operational, rules that this entity has for existing are quite different than anything else that's kind of ever been created across all these governance organizations. The original sub-DAOs in MakerDAO would probably be the most similar.
Yeah, I mean, so that's actually an interesting comparison because I guess if I think about the sub DAOs, I think about them as being sort of very functional focused, like at least maybe in original structure, like the Oracle's team and the RWA team and the yada yada. I guess maybe the one interesting tension I felt with the OpCo post, just reading through the post and then the comments, is it feels a bit in opposition to what I'd call like the Silicon Valley temperature of like founder mode and get lean type of thing, where it feels maybe like almost like a managerial layer kind of in between end service providers and the constituents, being the delegates or the DAO, essentially. How do you think about that? Like, is it an unfair characterization? Are the people that are going to be at the OpCo more doers than just overseers and project managers?
Yeah, so this entity is very flexible. Like, I think the way you described it is actually the way I view this thing evolving long term, which is it's too much to ask the delegates to, host RFPs where you get all these different service providers onboarded to go reach out to their networks to bolster the applicant pool, to, do all the research associated with choosing whatever, pretty much across every different expertise in fields, because it's Arbitrum after all. So like one day it'll be a marketing company and the next day it'll be a dev shop. So it's actually like maybe not realistic to expect to get the best results from doing all that DAO led. So exactly like you mentioned, it kind of adds a layer of centralization between the delegates and the service providers. That said, it's very flexible in scope. So if the DAO wants to actually have OpCo go and hire more people, like for instance, let's say instead of hiring the dev shop, just an example, like we want them to go hire 10 developers. And I don't think that that's how this is going to go, but the flexibility is there that if the DAO wants that, they could resource OpCo to go do that. You could see it evolving in that way too. That said, like I think your characterization is very valid, and that's how I foresee OpCo acting within the DAO. And I think there's a lot of value there. Like to some extent, with decentralized organizations, we've somehow managed to create a worse version of traditional governments. So if we can get closer to like Silicon Valley lean, company type operations, like we are so far ahead of the best DAO in the space today that that's a big win. It's one step at a time, inch by inch.
Yeah, and you bring up another kind of interesting point there around mostly working with third-party service providers versus bringing a lot of that in-house. One of the posts, Arbitrum has obviously done a lot of interesting things across the DAO. One of the things I found particularly interesting a while ago was Orita's work, just sort of studying what M&A could look like for Arbitrum. I remember reading through their deck, they said one of the big hindrances was just not having some of these structures like an OpCo, or I think they had mentioned a CapCo as well, like a capital company as well. How do you view something like that? I mean, do you think it makes sense for DAOs to be acquisitive and roll these things up into their overall structures, or just mostly work with third-party providers and stay leaner as a core team?
So in Arbitrum's case, I think that a lot of the time creating new functions versus internalizing existing ones are going to make sense. And that's just because Arbitrum is a huge brand, has a ton of resources. There's a couple $1 billion, although whether it's realizable or not, it's a different story. But, we have a lot of resources, great brand name. So I think a lot of the time it's actually going to make sense to start from scratch instead of acquiring to get a new function in the door. That said, there definitely are areas where I think acquisitions could make sense for the Arbitrum DAO in the future. And it is something that delegates and, the greater DAO, Areta leading it, is actively exploring. But yeah, I have trouble, especially with today's valuation, seeing a world where, seeing a deal that would really make sense for Arbitrum DAO to get involved in. but I'm definitely not against the idea or like throwing it out the door or dying on that hill. If there is interesting, there definitely could be a world where Arbitrum DAO makes an acquisition in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, jumping around a bit, I guess, on the topic of valuations and just how to think about the value of any of these networks in general today. I think when most people, myself included, look at layer twos, there tends to be a focus on TVL, transaction count, maybe stablecoin deposits on the chain. What do you think, I guess, maybe even putting on your former kind of hat as a research analyst as well, what do you think are the most important metrics for evaluating an L2's success, valuation, all of that?
Yeah, so I think the greater crypto space over the next, I don't know, it could be 3 years, more likely 5 to 10 years, is going to move into a more fundamental valuation based mindset, which is just not at all the case today. Like today, I guess for one example, like look at Celestia, who's doing like $8 a day in revenue or something, and multi-billion-dollar valuation. I'm not sure what it's even at, 10 billion valuation, something like that. Um, so we don't care as a space about fundamentals. We care about like the picture of what something could be in the future. So I think like with Celestia, we're like, okay, well, this could be a better version of Ethereum. Let's value it as such or something like that. If I was like, long-term fundamental investor and I was focused on like what roll-up metrics make the most sense to look at, it would be chain revenue. And chain revenue is defined by the fee levied on end users minus the cost to post data for data availability and settlement. And then additionally, like any MEV solution that might exist. So MEV in the rollup could be captured by the rollup itself. I would look at other revenue streams that might exist. So for instance, for Arbitrum DAO, this is a really interesting one. We actually have like $30 million or something like that in real world assets and T-bills. We'll probably expand our allocation there. So there we also, Entropy just passed a proposal related to treasury management too, where we're going to take 7,500 ETH from the treasury and potentially stake it and put it in Aave. There's a lot of open things we could do with it, but to get some yield on the ETH in the treasury. So that's like another potential revenue stream for the DAO long term. And then finally with Arbitrum, and I think this specifically only exists with Arbitrum and none of the other L2s have this, but we actually have a licensing fee. So if you want to go launch an Arbitrum chain using the Arbitrum tech stack, you have to actually pay 10% of your chain profit, into perpetuity back to the Arbitrum DAO. So if I was valuing, L2s, I'd probably value it based on those fundamental metrics. But maybe more importantly is also like, what can this thing grow into? So, is it positioned to really be somewhere where, most transactions in crypto are happening as the world moves on chain, and the vision of like where this ecosystem can go in the long term. But also I do think the fundamentals are important.
You've given me so many things I want to bookmark the licensing fee because I want to come back to that specifically kind of in the Arbitrum versus OP battle. But first on the sequencer fee. So you guys had another post that I thought was very interesting, actually just highlighting the fact that recently, I guess, Base and Optimism have been surpassing Arbitrum in weekly profits as a result of some of those fees, even though Arbitrum consistently has higher on-chain activity, which I think is just simply a matter of how much you're charging, kind of relative to the other folks and the trade-offs there. I guess, how do you view that? The challenge, I guess you could say, of making more money now versus higher transaction. How do you see the whole calculus of all those decisions?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. There's definitely trade-offs, right? Like I think from Entropy's perspective, we want to build Arbitrum DAO like we would build a business. So we want to focus on cost cutting, we want to focus on increasing revenue streams, but it's not just a business, right? I think like a better metaphor is probably a sovereign wealth fund where it's also focused on like improving the country. So I think if you look at, some of the countries that have been coming up in the world, like a lot of the time they're going to focus on bringing in brain power. So like take the brain drain from other countries, move it to us. Let's have incentive and grant programs that help, onboard, and legislation that helps onboard new people into our country. And I think that, they also have sovereign wealth funds, which is focused on, okay, let's make money by investing in our country, but also investing elsewhere. And I think that Arbitrum DAO should definitely function most similar to that, like a sovereign wealth fund kind of conglomerate. But it is a business and should be making money. And that's like the goal. That, in my opinion, should be the goal of every crypto protocol. To, create an environment that maximizes security, maximizes decentralization and maximizes accessibility to all as the most important thing. But also, long term, how do you actually sustain that? How do you continue to grow that? How do you continue to build the tech that actually does that? You need to be making money and you need to be like successful from that perspective. So that's why I think DAOs need to be like businesses so that we can continue to support what we really care about, which is the most decentralized, the most secure, the most accessible L2s, the most tech forward, building. the question was around how do we think about revenue versus growth, I guess it was like kind of at its core.
Yeah.
The way I see it, like Arbitrum should probably be operating as a loss leader for the, at least a couple of years. So like we should probably be spending significantly more from the treasury than we are getting in revenue for the next 3, 4, 5 years. But that said, we need a vision of long term how that's going to change. And we need a plan. Like most businesses have a plan. Okay, like maybe we're focused on growth for X years, but here's when we want to flip to profitable. And that's kind of what we're working on building in Arbitrum. So our opinion doesn't really matter on it so much. Like I think we probably would want to flip to profitable more quickly than most of the delegates, like maybe sometime 3, 4, 5 years. I think others are thinking more 10 years. But yeah, that's kind of what we're working through right now. First, we need strategic objectives. Then we need to budget each work stream and work through like what revenue we need to be hitting on what timeframes in order to become profitable in the long term.
I see. So, I mean, on that, I guess on the strategy and long-term planning piece, coming back to what you mentioned around the licensing fee, it feels to me, I guess, maybe only really within the last year, maybe a bit longer, I don't know. But it feels like everyone's kind of moved from the path of, it was just going to be Arbitrum and it was just going to be Optimism to we're now going to have this network of chains all using our same stacks. So whether it's clusters and orbits or superchains or elastic chains or Aglayer, I guess, in Polygon, it seems like that is now the direction that everyone has gone. It was either you guys or it was either Arbitrum or Optimism that kind of started this. What do you think about this today? I mean, it doesn't seem like Arbitrum has leaned in as heavily as Optimism has. Is that the right decision? Is that a mistake? How are you thinking about that whole calculus?
Yeah. So the industry shift to ecosystem of chains from like focusing on your own roll up has been very interesting to me. And I guess we're also seeing it shift back to some extent right now with the launch of Movement Labs and Mega ETH. Like I think that those two protocols have been getting pretty hot, and they're, to me, I don't believe that they're focused on ecosystems of chains. They're focused on let's build one really great roll up. So I do foresee that we might see a shift back in the near future. I think so Arbitrum always had this ecosystem of chains idea, but the focus was on L3s. So anyone could go permissionlessly launch an L3 on top of Arbitrum 1. And what we saw was no one was really interested in that. I think it had to do with the valuations more than anything else, like not like the compellingness of launching an L3 from a tech perspective, but rather the valuations associated with launching L2. We saw, and especially in early rounds with VCs, we saw a lot of people interested in launching L2s, and Arbitrum actually didn't even have the ability to do that unless you went to the DAO and got their approval to go use the tech to go build your L2. Not recently, maybe like 7 months ago, 12 months ago, probably 12 months ago, the Arbitrum DAO released something that allows anyone to permissionlessly go, it's called the open source expansion license, to go permissionlessly launch their own L2 in return for that 10% chain profit fee that goes back to the DAO. This was a big game changer. I think a lot of people still don't know about it, which is unfortunate. But when I think about the overarching, like why did the market shift from L2 versus L2 to chain ecosystem versus chain ecosystem, I think it was twofold. One, Arbitrum won Arbitrum versus Optimism, and they have a really, really amazing marketing team. So like, they've managed to actually shift the whole crypto Twitter, crypto industries mindset to what matters is Superchain versus Orbit. When from my perspective, it actually is less important to have like a super vibrant, well, we don't need to get into that just yet. I could talk about that for hours, but I think a lot of it had to do with Optimism doing an absolutely great job of marketing around the Superchain and having that become a focus of the industry after Arbitrum 1 had surpassed Optimism in all, relevant metrics. Yeah, that said, I do think we'll shift back. I think like Cosmos is the precedent here. So Cosmos, from an ecosystem of chains perspective, has been extremely successful. Celestia, DYDX, Tendermint as a whole has been like the tech that Cosmos has created has been extremely successful, but the token hasn't been able to capture a lot of that value. And it seems like we're just running back the same playbook. Like it's absolute. Yeah, it's just insane. And no one's learning lessons.
I don't know much about, so I just want to say, I did not know about the open source expansion license, for the record. I did not know that was a thing. I thought that actually people wanting to use the Arbitrum stack had to pay the DAO some sort of upfront licensing cost, which compared to what Optimism offers today, obviously was a mistake. So I'm glad to have learned about that, kind of number one.
It's a big problem. The amount of awareness around that is a big issue.
Yeah. In the Cosmos example, though, as a comparison, what's the economic arrangement between Cosmos/Atom and Cosmos chains?
So at the beginning, Cosmos was supposed to be the hub where all IBC volume went through Cosmos, or it was the main hub that IBC volume went through. what Cosmos saw over time was it wasn't acting as the hub. It was just one of the spokes, and it was another place that, liquidity was going through or bridge volume was going through, but it wasn't like a needed thing in the system. So, they kind of had an identity crisis over the last, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years. I'm not as up to date on it anymore. Just like since I stopped being a researcher, my view has definitely become a little bit more myopic into just like roll up ecosystem stuff. But anyways, they started working on things like, okay, can we sell Cosmos' security? So like we'll secure your new L1 via the Atom token and the Atom validator set. Can we sell that? Even more recently, I believe there's kind of like another shift in like, here's another value for Cosmos that I'm forgetting the exact details on. But they did the whole let's grow at all costs thing and worry about how we're going to be like a revenue generating organization vehicle, whatever, later. And it did not work, at least from my perspective. It did from a tech perspective, and it didn't from a value accrual perspective.
Yeah, no, I think everyone would agree that in the Cosmos example, it didn't really work well. The reason I ask about the economic arrangement is, I guess so again, when I saw the first Optimism like Superchain deal, I think was probably with Base, was at least the first one that got a lot of coverage. I feel like everyone focused on the big number of tokens that OP gives to the chains that decide to deploy with them. But then there is the second part of that, which is that they're getting into perpetuity, I believe, the sequencer fees from these other chains. And I view them as like kind of diversified venture bets almost, where if you're in the optimism seat, you're like, okay, maybe we're not actually going to be the place where billions of users come, but there's a good chance that Coinbase can crack that, or Kraken can crack that, or XYZ chain. So I see them as more as like these kind of diversified bets, and it seems like that's where they're spending their energy today. You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, so I mean, they spent like, I think at current prices, like 250, 300 million on Coinbase. And that was probably money well spent, honestly. Like as far as like brand recognition, PR, actual revenue long term, like there's a chance that actually pays off. Most of these other deals, like paying 100 million for Kraken, I have a feeling that we're going to go back and wonder how, how some of these deals were made and what the kind of thought process was as far as like, how am I actually from 15% of sequencer revenue long term? What is it? I think 15% of it might be 15% of sequencer revenue long term. Like how is this actually going to pay off? Like there's just no world where it does, especially as I believe the margin on the fee levied on end users versus actual costs will probably go down. But I guess one thing to me is like, in Optimism's model, there's also no forcing mechanism to keep them in. So like, I have no idea what the terms of that grant agreement with Base were, but as far as like actual technical, like as far as the actual licensing, there's nothing that forces Base to not switch over at any point to a new ecosystem besides the fact that they own a ton of OP, so have some forced alignment. I guess not a great, like to me, it's not a great business model, right? Like it's kind of like opt-in communism where anyone can just can just leave at any time and you don't care. You just gave them all this money.
Yeah. Again, I just have to say, I've always just been confused, I guess, by optimism because it's not how I would have approached, not to spend the whole conversation on optimism, obviously, but I've always been confused by even things like retroactive public good grants and all of these things that I would agree feel very communist or very socialist or something. But they do have, I don't know, something very unquantifiable just in the vibes around it, I guess.
100%. Their marketing and brand team is absolutely ridiculous. Like I would do anything to be able to emulate that from Entropy or like for Arbitrum. Like they really, between Coinbase and Optimism and now some of their newer partnerships, like as far as their ability to communicate messages to the greater crypto industry and even outside the crypto industry, it's really good. So I definitely do give them credit, and I think they're a cool team doing cool stuff.
So you actually bring up something else, just I guess as we're talking about the vibes, is I had this idea the other day. I was just listening to a podcast or something about L2s maybe, and I feel like if I look at most L2s today, the ones that I find to be most successful are ones like Arbitrum and Optimism that obviously have just giant war chests where they can fund different grants and attract people that way. And then there's this other category that I guess really is like Base today where, they just have this person like Jesse that is just so authentic and just energetic. And the way that he's able to attract people and just very organic vibes to the chain where they're not paying anybody even. People are just so excited by it. It's almost like this, Messiah-likeness to it or something.
Jesse has been such an asset to crypto and the crypto industry, and Coinbase launching a chain has just been so valuable. Like I would say, I think a lot of people probably do accept that, it's a bit more like on the decentralization scale, like it's a bit more towards the corporate than towards the like, let's focus on like as fully decentralized, as fully secure systems as we can. But it doesn't matter. Like any step towards the direction is good. So I definitely have been super impressed with Jesse. I've been super impressed with Base, like especially most recently with a lot of the AI narrative that they've been able to pick up from Solana. Like it's been really cool to see.
So, all right, so let's talk about kind of these different approaches of what the L2 should focus on. Something that's actually very interesting to me about Arbitrum is that you guys seem to have taken very clear, or you could disagree, but I would say very clear sector bets. The two that stand out to me are gaming. You guys have this somewhat controversial, I guess you could say, ginormous gaming fund, and then RWAs, whether that's through the investments that you guys have made into T-bill providers or just getting people excited to deploy there as well. How do you think about taking those sector bets as a chain? Have those been, you think, the right strategy so far for Arbitrum? Have they paid off? How do you view that where we stand today?
Yeah, so to me, we've still taken the biggest bet on DeFi. And like, I think that's the right decision and something we should continue to do. I think we should be taking more bets on DeFi, like instead of just incentives to existing protocols, like we should be, focusing on more long-term sustainable ways to help support our builders on Arbitrum 1 and Orbit, but even more so on Arbitrum 1, in my opinion. Gaming is an interesting one. So when I first saw the proposal for the GCP, which is Arbitrum DAO has actually created a vehicle, like an actual organization, a legal entity that is at current prices, 150 million, I believe, dollar fund to about $150 million fund to invest in gaming projects on Arbitrum. Definitely unprecedented thing for a DAO to do from a lot of angles, like setting up the legal entity to actually do the investments, just spending that much money on a new sector. Pretty much everything about it is unprecedented, but it's actually in a really good place. So, we like stay up with the team working on that pretty often just to make sure, see what's going on. And yeah, it's in a really good place. It's really cool to see. Actually, as a call out, like they are looking to hire people with past VC experience. So, and specifically gaming VC experience. So if you know anyone good, definitely feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Telegram or whatever and connect you with the team there. But it's in a cool place. Like the legal entity stood up. There's 2 existing full-time members to the team. They're building it out and they're starting to work on like capturing deal flow. I think that one thing we need to do, sorry for changing the subject to like sector specific bets, but I just think the GCP and gaming's like this fund's pretty cool. Like we need to formalize our resources. So like having the support of the Arbitrum Foundation and Entropy advisors and all the other DAO resources is actually really valuable. So we need to figure out how to formalize those resources as additional investment or additional value beyond just capital for the DAO's portfolio companies. But yeah, we're figuring it out and it's going to be pretty cool. I think once we get it all sorted. As far as sector specific bets, like it just makes sense. You can only focus your attention and resources in so many places. So like trying to pick out, for instance, I think Arbitrum has made a pretty aggressive stance. Like we think retro public goods funding doesn't really make sense. So let's not focus our resource on like infrastructure and tooling for that, like some of our competitors do. And instead, like, let's try to build out this investment mindset where like we're instead of like giving out money and grants and all that, which Arbitrum still does, don't get me wrong, but let's like work towards being able to actually make strategic investments instead. Yeah, like I think it's a great mindset, and DeFi and gaming and RWAs are probably great choices. DeFi and gaming for the bull market and real world assets for when the bear market comes back around, I think it'll pay off. And yeah, like I think those are 3 very, very good choices of sectors to focus on, with AI being the one that might be missing, but probably, not as sustainable or as proven of a model long term, and might be really hot for the next 4 months, but might also then have quite a lull period where it makes more sense to get involved.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's pretty difficult to curate, but obviously meme coins just being the other thing. I do follow this one account, Art School Reject, and I think he's tried to, really get Arbitrum meme coins going, and nothing really ever stuck there. Might have lost some money on some of this.
Yeah, I think we don't even have the infrastructure. Like, so we just got our first launchpad platform, whatever you want to call it, pump.fun thing. It's called goo.exchange. It's really, really cool, well built. It's not that Arbitrum doesn't have the users, it's that we haven't had the infrastructure thus far. And then like once you have the infrastructure, you need like to bring the cool meme coin projects over, which is tough in itself just because Solana has had such a network effect around that. But I think people are working on it. Like specifically, I'll give a shout out to the Camelot team, who's just like super focused on trying to bring some of the meme coin attention over to Arbitrum.
Yeah, so my mistake to kind of gloss over the DeFi piece in terms of Arbitrum's bets, because I would agree. I think specifically on derivatives, perps, like I think there's maybe how a lot of people interacted with Arbitrum for the first time. And something that stands out to me in Arbitrum compared to other ecosystems is that I feel Arbitrum has done a great job of having homegrown success stories, like a GMX or a Gains or a Vertex, where actually maybe in the GMX case they launched on Binance Chain first or something, but their success obviously happened on Arbitrum.
Mhm.
And if I look at other chains, it seems like in a lot of cases they spend a lot of time trying to get the big apps, the Uniswap, the Aave, to become the big thing there. But those apps don't have the same affinity towards the chain as a GMX might towards Arbitrum or something. So I guess how do you value the different, or how do you think about the difference between just getting Aave and Uniswap to launch and be the biggest apps versus growing some of these things on the chain and having them be these like Arbitrum linked success stories?
Yeah, I almost feel like that's the same question as asking like what inning of crypto adoption are we in? To me, it's like all right, like I guess the way I see it is what's the actual end goal here? It's like bring everybody in the world on chain. Okay, every L2 agrees with that. Cool. How do you do that? You build compelling block space. You build block space that people want to use. And what actually is that? That's cool apps that bring people who wouldn't have otherwise transacted on on Arbitrum or any crypto rails, brings them over. So I guess that's the key, right? It's like, how do we build the tech stack and the resources that enables the most interesting block space builders, or the people who have the apps that create the most compelling block space specifically to Arbitrum. So like expanding Arbitrum's toolkit with Stylus, which allows any Rust dev to come over, creating really good resources, whether it be capital or brain power or anything else to support our builders. Like that's, I think, the key here. And yeah, like long term, in my opinion, like when it comes to crypto adoption, if we're anywhere past the third inning, like then we're probably a big failure as a space, like overall. So yeah, like obviously we should be bringing over builders who are focused on building cool stuff using the resources that Arbitrum provides. That said, I don't think there's any issue with being cross chain. Like it just makes sense to some extent depending on your app and what you're building. Like for instance, if you're leveraging Stylus, like obviously you kind of can only do that on Arbitrum. But yeah, like there's no problem with being cross chain either. Like Arbitrum should be supporting its cross chain builders too. That said, it is unique that Arbitrum has built an ecosystem where people do feel, tied in a way that's like, okay, like I identify with Arbitrum. I want to tie myself to this brand. I want to tie myself to this tech stack. And I think that's largely surrounding like some of the security focused, I would call it, into some of the intellectually honest decisions that Arbitrum has made. So like it's not marketing, they don't like Arbitrum has chosen not to do any like marketing of BS or like tying itself to short-term narratives. It's kind of really focused on building like truly decentralized, truly secure tech. And I think that does resonate with some builders.
Yeah, and I guess specific to some of those apps and the L2 world is that we definitely see the trend today of a lot of apps looking to just launch their own L2s as well, whether that's, on an Arbitrum stack or an OP stack or whatever it might be. Um, Perhaps compared to just launching instances on each individual chain. What do you think of that trend? And I guess also, how do you, from the Arbitrum lens, think about remaining competitive and, you know, attracting those builders with in some type of way?
Yeah. So, I mean, choosing to launch an L1 is going to go cost you like, if you're including the cost to actually bootstrap a truly decentralized validator set, like probably hundreds, but at minimum tens of millions of dollars. If you want to go launch an L2, the appeal is you're like, oh, it's not that expensive. It is. If you want to launch an actually good general purpose execution environment L2, it is still over $10 million. Like if you want that chain link integration and you want the oracles you need and you want Aave and you want Compound and you want Uniswap and you want all this different stuff, like it is expensive and not that simple and not that easy. Now, where going and launching your own chain, I think really makes sense is if you're doing some sort of customization that can't happen by building on an L2. So I think like 90% of the current people who are like, let me go build an L1, let me go build an L2 are doing it because they think it's going to get them a higher valuation. And that's like not long-term sustainable and probably not a good idea for their business unless they're just trying to like get money out as quickly as possible and go. But where it does make sense is if you want to do some sort of customization that you can't do by building on another layer. So for Arbitrum, like, they're building Stylus. Like, yes, we're scaling block space by creating a higher throughput environment, but we're also creating Stylus to actually truly expand the EVM, beyond what solely the EVM enables. For, Mega ETH, they're taking that scalability to the next level where they're really trying to like build out this ultra high throughput environment that sacrifices some aspects of decentralization for higher throughput. So that also expands the EVM and creates things to the ability to do things that wouldn't be possible on a traditional EVM network. Movement Labs is creating a Move L2. So I think there's lots of examples of L2s, or Zai is a good example on Arbitrum, who's created an L3 that's focused on gaming. So there's lots of customization that you can actually do at the chain level for specific apps that wouldn't be possible to go build. But if you don't have that feature or that like desire, I think that it's kind of stupid. But that said, as a space, like we like to do stupid stuff sometimes if we think it's gonna print money, and maybe it's not stupid if they're gonna make more money from it anyways.
Right. I mean, I think that that's kind of, yeah, maybe the 2 points would be: one, there is, I think, generally speaking, a valuation premium for having a layer 2. And then, I remember at the time where DYDX launched their own chain and did all that, there's also, I think, maybe a legal argument as well, just at least historically, in terms of being able to give more utility to the token in a way
Sure.
where, obviously, so the people who look at that, perhaps less relevant in the L2 landscape specifically, though. Something I had made a note of earlier that I wanted to come back to was, you mentioned that within Arbitrum, there was maybe a competing vision between focusing on Ethereum versus maybe looking at other L1s and sort of developing on other L1s. What was that all about? I'm not familiar with that conversation or the context.
Yeah, so the way that the expansion pack license had been written at like when it first launched, the expansion pack being the thing that lets anyone permissionlessly go launch an L2 with the Arbitrum tech, was that it had to settle, I think, and use Ethereum for data availability. So in other words, it had to be an L2 on top of Ethereum. Maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, the DAO had voted to expand the license so that anyone can go build an L2 with Arbitrum's tech stack as long as they pay that 10% fee. So now people are going and creating L2s on top of Barachain. I think the first one on top of Telegram, TON, just launched. Probably will happen across every L1 with the Arbitrum tech stack at some point. We actually even see L3, like we see L3s on top of Base, like Degen chain being built with the Arbitrum tech stack. So that's pretty cool and funny in itself. Anyways, like there's a bit of, it's not like a controversy at all, but I think that for some people, really hyper focusing and tightly aligning with Ethereum is like the path forward. Like we think Ethereum's got the best chance at bringing the world on chain. It's the most decentralized, secure chain. For instance, like maybe we don't identify with Tron so much because we think that if the world coming on chain happened on Tron or like BNB chain or something, that it wouldn't have all the benefits that would come with the security and decentralization that comes with Ethereum. So like that's why we want to like tightly align with them. And others are like, well, I guess, do we really want to tightly align with them that much, or would we rather still, support Ethereum, really care about its future, but open the door to in the future, like scaling other ecosystems too and having a more broad reach. So it's just like a bit of a controversy to some extent, where some people feel one way, some feel the other way. Honestly, I don't really feel strongly either way. Like I think tightly aligning with Ethereum makes quite a lot of sense, but I also think that there's no reason we shouldn't support other L1s as well.
Right, and I guess this is actually kind of the big discussion in the Ethereum community writ large right now. I mean, I wasn't at DevCon, but I caught some of the talks specifically with Vitalik and the L2 founders. And I mean, it seems like right now maybe there's this, maybe there's two tensions. One, there's the tension between Ethereum and L2s, just kind of generally speaking, in terms of maybe Ethereum, to your point, doesn't feel like they're as aligned as maybe they would like it to be in some cases. And then there's perhaps a second question of, what we talked about earlier, each of the L2 ecosystems having either their orbits and clusters or superchains or elastic chains that are all sort of segmented from each other. I don't even know what the question is, but
No, I actually have a lot. So it's like,
yeah.
I think the conversation started with what's his name? The network effects guy. Solana, big investor at Multicoin Capital.
Kyle Samani.
Kyle Samani, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yes, the conversation started with Kyle Samani, where he's like shitting on L2s, and he's like, this is fundamentally not Ethereum. Like they're not Ethereum aligned. They have their own block space ordering, so they're able to capture MEV that Ethereum's not able to capture. Blah 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 blah. They don't have to use ETH as their gas token. Whatever. And he's like, but network, what's he call them? Network extenders or something, like on Solana are perfect because whatever. And then the conversation moved on. And I think that there's pieces of the conversation that are true and pieces that are just like, complete cap in order to pump one's own bags. But like the true part is we need better nomenclature to define like what truly is an Ethereum L2. For instance, if you use ETH as your gas token, but you settle to Celestia and use Celestia for DA. Actually, settlement doesn't work on Celestia. Whatever. Let's say you use ETH as your gas token, but you don't use settle or use DA on Ethereum. Or you an L2? Like obviously, I think no, but it's kind of still up in the air. So we need better nomenclature and we need to figure. Ethereum doesn't do like as this objective, credibly neutral L1 doesn't do a great job at taking opinionated stances. So like maybe they should say if you're an L2 that actually has like a working fraud proof system, settles and uses Ethereum for DA and uses ETH as your gas token, maybe like you should be favored versus an L2 that doesn't do that. So that doesn't exist. And then the other piece of the conversation is that if you're a new entrant into the market, you might not get the same support that say Optimism does, where it kind of feels like there's this Ethereum cabal that's impossible to penetrate. So I think that's where a lot of the tension comes from. That said, I think a lot of it is kind of like, I think a lot of it's kind of BS. I do think L2s extend Ethereum. I do think that, you know, L2s help create new things that weren't possible before on Ethereum, like looking at Stylus or Movement Labs and Move L2 is like good examples of like we're actually expanding the EVM in ways that, you know, Ethereum mainnet could never support. But yeah, like I get it, right? And also a big piece of it's like price action. So for the last 12 months, Ethereum hasn't been performing well, and now that it is, I have a feeling that ETH alignment is about to skyrocket again. So yeah, there's pieces of the conversation that are legit, and then there's pieces of the conversation that are kind of just BS or price action led.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe the fair version of this that is relevant for the L2 space is, again, I think one of the things I saw coming out of some of the DevCon talks was right now there are, you know, the chain specific ecosystems, and there's kind of this lack of Ethereum L2 unification of superchains and clusters and orbits and elastic chains. How do you think, I guess, in terms of like maybe with more of like a strategy hat on for Arbitrum, is it better for Arbitrum to have strong lock-in within its ecosystem, or is it better that it is, you know, max interoperable with Optimism chains and ZK chains and,
Max
you know, polygons?
interoperable. Like we
Yeah.
need better interoperability. Like it's the biggest problem in Ethereum today. Not even like it's not even a question what's the biggest problem in Ethereum today. Maybe DAO's not working is a big problem too, like that we need more sophisticated actors helping make sure governance works. But no, it's the biggest problem in Ethereum today is interoperability between L2s. We need a more seamless user experience. If we're not prioritizing end users, like we're fucked as a space. I think that it's happening though. Like I think we are seeing like some of the friction between Optimism and Arbitrum and ZK saying slow down, and people like hop on board this train of like, okay, let's put all that shit behind us and really focus on you know, enabling a better Ethereum for end users. But there's also like fundamental differences between rollups. For instance,
Yeah.
like I'm not sure I would ever want a fully abstracted experience because maybe my funds are sitting on some L2 that has like an EOA upgradability mechanism, and that's just like fundamentally different than keeping your money in Arbitrum. I like to compare it to like uh you know, like keeping money in your Vanguard TD Ameritrade Schwab account versus keeping it in like, I don't know, whatever, some even less advanced version of Venmo is or whatever. Like it's just different. Like your security concerns are just different, and you would treat the money differently that's kept in these different ecosystems. So I don't think we're ever gonna have like perfect interoperability, but we don't need perfect. We need better than the transfer process between Venmo and your TD Ameritrade account. So like we don't need this perfect unified everything kumbaya ecosystem. We just need better than our competitors in the Web2 TradFi space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as we're wrapping up, just a few last questions. One is you mentioned some of those friction points. What are the other things to you today that feel like giant friction points, either, again, Ethereum more broadly or within the Arbitrum ecosystem specifically?
Like friction points, meaning
I would,
like just problems in the space.
yeah, I would say friction points for users specifically. So not necessarily like for developers, which are kind of their own bucket of.
Yeah, like interoperability number one. I think like everyone has had that experience where they bridge over, they don't have the gas token on the chain they're at, and they have to like go figure it out, and it's just the biggest headache. And that's as a power user. I don't want to come as a power user, but as someone who uses it often, outside of interoperability, I think that we don't have that many compelling reasons to come on chain. Like out, we have the most important reason, which is those that care about self custody, those that care about like the ability to like control their own future, like kind of that self sovereign type mindset. But outside of that, like we need more compelling reasons to get people to use this stuff so that then they can see the value and stick around. Like NFTs, meme coins, like these aren't great examples of like, bringing people on chain or bringing the right people on chain. So I think, yeah, I guess like we need more compelling apps. We need less friction for real world companies to utilize crypto rails. Like I imagine that it's pretty hard for a bit, like let's say, 20, like a 10 to 50 million, like a small to medium sized business. And they're trying to come on chain and like figure out like some way to use crypto rails. It's not that simple. Like we need to make the onboarding for more traditional developers just like easier, so that they can build more compelling uses to get more real users on chain. Wallets also kind of stink. Like I don't want to like shit on wallet companies, but yeah, like
Yeah.
our wallets aren't that good.
Yeah. I mean, at least one of the big things, that we're as a company taking a bet on with the work we're doing with Vaults.fyi is that I think yield today is mature enough and is an exciting reason to get people on chain. I mean, I'm just taking a look right now on Arbitrum, specifically on Compound and Aave, which are two of the most established protocols. They've got 30-day average APYs of 9% to just over 10% on Compound V3 USDC on Arbitrum. So, these are actually compelling yields. I mean, 2x plus kind of what you could get in T-bills today. So, I think just the experience of I have money in my bank account to I'd like to earn on Compound and Aave is a big thing that at least we're focused on.
Yeah, I mean, like right now, I think like this week we saw 15+% yields on USDC on Aave. So like it is compelling, but it only exists because people think they can make more money than that over the bull market, like with the current
Correct.
price action. And then like it's not really sustainable. Like I bet on like the next 2 to 3 years, I'm not sure if maybe we will, but like on the next 3 years, we might not beat out like 7-8% yields. And then, are people really going to come over to crypto for that? Like I know a lot of crypto natives and a lot of people, like there are people who will, but it doesn't feel to me like it feels like a use case that'll bring a lot of money over and not like, billions of users.
Fair point. Fair point. I don't know. I mean, we don't have to debate it specifically, but I think about a lot of my friends who don't have money in crypto, but have been very excited about like the 4 or 5% that they get in their checking account on T-bills today. Like if they have a, more favorable fintech type of bank. So I guess it does depend what happens in the traditional economy. Because I mean, 6 or 7% on crypto APYs is still appealing to people who otherwise the alternative is zero and
True.
Aren't otherwise thinking about 100x meme coin type of returns. So all right.
No,
So
I agree.
last,
I agree.
yeah.
We could use some more too though. We could use like some games using crypto rails for their marketplaces. Yes. We could use some. There's more examples.
Yes, totally. So I guess the last question is, looking ahead for the next few years of Arbitrum, what are you most excited about, and what do you think will be the defining characteristic of successful layer twos in the future?
I'm super excited about Stylus. You could probably tell by the amount I talked about it on just this, podcast right now. But I think Stylus is 0 to 1 as far as the number of developers that can build on Ethereum. Like it just opens up a new door. You're still building on Ethereum and you can build in Rust. Like to me, that's really cool. Not that you couldn't build in Rust on Polkadot or on Solana before, but being able to do it on Ethereum is pretty awesome. I'm really excited to see the DAO mature into a state where it has like efficient, effective operations, and Entropy being a big piece of that. The investment vehicles I think are going to be awesome. Like if we can create multiple investment vehicles that are DAO led or DAO owned or whatever you want to call it, I think that that's going to be like a pretty big game changer. And I think that those would probably be the two biggest Arbitrum exciting factors for me. Creating more resources for our builders, of course. Sorry, what was the second question?
And I guess this kind of comes back to everything we talked about, but if you were to think about what will be the defining characteristic of the most successful L2s in the future, what do you think are the things to look out for?
Yeah, most successful L2s are going to actually innovate on Ethereum. Like they're not going to just create the same copy pasta generic EVM clone where you can just go build the same apps, Uniswap, Aave, whatever. Like you have to like enable fundamentally different use cases that weren't possible on Ethereum mainnet. You have to have like the correct business models in place. Well, so there's two parts of the conversation, which is like the token one and then the tech one. Like someone can go build a Cosmos L2 that sees a lot of adoption, but maybe it's not as interesting to like the general market as ones who are able to like capture more of that value to their token or like whatever to their governance. Anyways, like you want to make sure that like whatever L2 probably has like a sturdy business model and like a foreseeable way to actually like be, you know, yeah, like a more have more fundamentals attached to it than other ecosystems in the past generally have. And you probably want to find one who actually like really cares about decentralization and security, or at least if it was me. Like I know a lot of people don't care about that, but a lot of L2s will put stuff in their documentation, yada yada, and then they'll just have like a 3 of 5 multi-sig that the team appointed who actually controls everything. Like I would probably avoid those and find teams who really care about like tech forward thinking, decentralization, and security.
Makes a ton of sense. Well, if there's anything else that we didn't cover that you want to, I'll leave the floor to you.
I guess I would just say like Arbitrum DAO truly is community led. So like if you think that you have an expertise or a skill set where you're going to provide value, like first of all, just go check out the Arbitrum forum, potentially get involved there. Like two, please feel free to reach out to me if you think you have an idea for something that'll provide value. Like that's, you know, it makes us look good too at Entropy Advisors if we help bring in sophisticated expert contributors into the DAO. So please do feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you. And where can people find you on Twitter, your site?
Twitter at Matt Fiebach or Entropy Advisors on Twitter as well.
Awesome. All right, Matt. Well, thank you for all the time today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.